With a deep, long exhale that took every last bit of air out of his lungs, James hung up his call. Wordlessly, and with his chest deflated, he simply remained standing there for a few seconds, feeling how his system gradually drained itself of oxygen, while he tried his best to clear his thoughts and listen into himself. But all he felt was a chaos that he couldn't calm. He had no idea if he was ready for this, and trusting the word of others had never in his life felt as hard as it did right now, not even the many times his life had literally depended on the word of others. All he could do was reassure himself. He could do this. He would do this. And they all would get through this. He would make it happen. He had to. Feeling the raging chaos storm die down only ever so slightly at his own reassurances, he finally allowed himself to inhale again. He forced himself to not violently gasp for air, as if he had just emerged from a deep dive. Instead, he very deliberately began to allow air to rush into his body through his nose, adamant to keep full control of the flow as he did so. Once his lungs were full, he kept the air in for only a moment before allowing it to rush back out of his mouth in a pursed-lipped exhale, while also opening his eyes again. With steady and deliberate steps, he then began walking back to the rest of his group at an even and controlled pace. The projections of his team's expression looked back at him with a strange sense of wonder and anticipation. Nia and Moore, on the other hand, looked like they already sensed the severity of the situation, and a mounting dread seemed to take hold of them. Meanwhile, Curie and Conglord stood by with stony expressions, not giving a hint as to what was going on behind their faces. That only left one. Unlike all the others, Sheeda approached him as he returned to the group. After meeting back up outside of the conference room, once the recess had been called, James had immediately separated from everyone again, and she had waited patiently for him to be done with his preparations. But now, they could finally discuss what needed to be said. "Are you feeling any better?" James asked her, knowing that he sadly would most likely have to force her to join them in the room once again, once the proceedings would return to order. It was for everyone's safety. "Not really, but I think I can sit it out," Sheeda confirmed for him. Her expression stuck between assuring and sickened by the thought, which James couldn't fault her for. With her ears twitching, likely to subtly remind him of her fine hearing, she then lifted a hand to gently put it on the side of his mask, where his cheek would usually be found. "So, it's come down to it, huh?" James nodded, while lifting his own hand to press it onto hers. "Yes," he replied with a sigh that reflected the weight he felt pushing down on him. "Not how I wanted things to go, but I'm also glad that the secrecy will be over." Allowing his head to sink down, his mask pressed against Sheeda's forehead. "I honestly can't tell if I'm overjoyed or devastated that you're here with me for it," he whispered, as he closed his eyes for another moment. "I wouldn't want to be away from it," Sheeda whispered back, while her other hand also lifted, to gently sink down onto the back of his head. "Not again." Letting out the mildest hint of a laugh, James embraced her. As he felt her body in his arms, a primal part of him wished that they could just remain like that. Just unload all of this weight and pressure in a hug, until nothing bothered them anymore. Of course, that was not how anything worked, and so they soon let go. Together, they joined back up with the rest of the group. "Usually, I would offer anyone who doesn't want to stick around the chance to get out now, but I'm afraid that would be way too dangerous to do so," James explained, as he looked at everyone's faces individually. "For better or for worse, it's safest if we all stick together now." Moore was the first to step forwards. Slowly, she approached him with her lumbering steps, one clawed hand lifted to her face, while long fur hung off her thin arm, while the other half extended towards James, but stopped in mid-air long before it reached him. "James,"
What are you going to do? She asked,
her tone filled with all kinds of strongly held back emotions. Light reflected, twinklingly, in her wet, dark eyes. James swallowed, but a feline hand clasping around his gave him courage. "I'm going to come clean," he said, with a look up at the giant. "Everything that's been said, everything that's been done, I'm putting it all on the table. I will let the galaxy be my witness that I made my choices and I am willing to stand for them, like I always was." He then wondered if he should prepare all of them for what was about to happen. However, he decided against it. "It's better if I don't tell you more right now," he said, with a creeping sadness gradually reaching for his words. "I don't know how you're going to react to it, but whatever your reaction may be, it will be better if it is genuine inside of that chamber. You knew of nothing and people will see that. I don't want anyone to unjustly think you're involved." Although he didn't say much, the concerning vagueness of his statement seemed to already give at least some of them ideas of what was going on, especially given the recent tensions back on Earth.
"James, you can't be,"
Nia began. However, James cut her off with a raised hand and slowly shook his head. "Let's keep it for the big reveal, alright?" he suggested, although his tone didn't leave much room to argue. Seemingly stricken by his words and looking for some reassurance that surely what she was thinking couldn't be true, Nia glanced around to the faces of her other fellow humans for any sort of support. However, the projections of the faces of James's entire team, including his own girlfriend, were just as glum and anticipating as that of her brother was. They all knew. Of course they did. As James watched that realization sink in for his sister in real time, he suddenly noticed a huge shadow creeping in from his side. Turning his head, he looked up just in time to see a huge hand sink down to grasp around his shoulder, as Conglorch bowed his upper body in a show of respect.
"It is a rare sight to see a dancer stand firm,"
the Lizardor informed him, with his deep, bellowing voice that came through barely parted rows of sharp teeth. "You carry yourself well, James. Keep that up, and the galaxy will see it too. I, for one, will stand with you." All of the giant's 4 fiery eyes were focused down onto him. James exhaled, slowly, not knowing if he should be inspired or bemused by the strange encouragement. "Thank you," he ultimately said, with genuine fondness in his voice. "For everything." Hesitantly, he then turned to Curie. The cyborg still stood without any movement, their lightly glowing red eyes fixating on him with great attention. "I think," they began to say, noticing his eyes on them. However, they then cut themselves off and shook their body slightly to rephrase it. "I believe in you. I believe that I cannot have misjudged you to such a degree that anything you did will make me no longer want to stand with you. Not after you stood with me when nobody else would. You said you wouldn't rather have anyone else by your side, and I will be." While James appreciatively bowed his head to the cyborg, more than came forth once more, seemingly feeling like she needed to say something as well.
"I am not sure what you have in store for us this time, but I cannot imagine abandoning you to face it alone once again either,"
she said, her gaze noticeably falling onto his cybernetic arm.
"I cannot promise that it will not take me time, but I do not wish to let myself be blinded by my own ignorance again. Therefore, I will listen to your reason, and knowing you, I am sure I will see it as well."
Exhaling, slowly, James was already starting to think that he was feeling one too many emotions right before such a huge event. But, seeing as it couldn't get much worse, he turned to his team. "Anyone got anything to say? Now's your chance," he offered to them. The humans briefly exchanged some looks with each other, It didn't really seem like they had much need to get anything out. "If we're going to have to fight our way out of here because of this, I'm going to be so mad," Athena notified everyone with a sigh, while patting the side of her belt with one hand, while throwing her long ponytail back with the other. "Remember to count your kills if it comes to that," Coco chimed in, with a tone that seemed to try to break up the tension. "Makes documentation so much easier if we don't have to scrub through the footage." She tapped at the camera attached to her chest with a finger. Giving the two a hesitant courtesy chuckle, James then turned to his sister once more. She still looked on in disbelief, seemingly overwhelmed by what was happening. Momentarily letting go of Sheeta's hand, James walked over to her, immediately pulling her into a tight hug. "You don't have to worry," he assured her, doing his absolute best to confidently speak this truth into existence. By any metric, she had done nothing wrong. At the very least, he would ensure everyone knew about that. Nia held him for a moment, before shifting her head slightly. "What about you?" she asked, gently. "I can handle myself," James replied immediately. "And I'll have no regrets." Apparently not quite knowing how to react to what he had said, Nia just squeezed him tighter. "I love you," was all she said in the end, and James could feel his heart drop at her words. "I love you too," James replied seriously, and after a few more long seconds, they let go of each other again. Clearing his throat, James looked around at everyone. "We should probably get back inside early," he suggested, feeling like keeping a good overwatch over the situation was a valuable strategy. Although hesitant, everyone followed him as he led the way, and soon enough, they were back on their seats, after checking everything for possible tampering once again. For now, the room was still relatively empty. One or two of the other representatives had already found themselves back as well, and many nervous glances were thrown James's way after the earlier outburst. However, as James settled into his seat to go over how exactly he wanted to say what he had to, he heard a weird sound of pitter-patter in front of him. Leaning forwards in confusion and looking down at the railing, his eyes then quickly caught the brief, signal-coloured fur of a Pixameria climbing up towards him. The nimble lemur forwent the need for the offered stairs, and simply used the railing as more than enough purchase to make it up to the second level, small hands soon reaching over the sides to completely pull the pink and spotted body up. Now sitting directly in front of James on almost eye level, Losserana looked at James with mildly glowing eyes. "Can I help you?" James asked, as he shifted his position slightly to look at the man head on. The lemur started, but then heavily hesitated as he awkwardly shuffled his body around. Something seemed to make him majorly uncomfortable, although it didn't appear to be for an all-too-serious reason. Strangely feeling put the tiniest bit at ease at the display of sincere awkwardness, James let out a bemused breath. "Whatever it is, it's all right," James therefore informed the glowing lemur, and reassuringly raised a hand. "I've been called every name in the book and had to answer every question I can think of. You won't insult me with whatever you have to say." With some honest relief apparently rushing over the Pixameria's face, Losserana pushed himself up to all four of his feet again, balancing on top of the railing. "Forgive the inconvenience, Ambassador, but we would like to relocate your seat," he informed James. "Relocate my seat?" James asked with a head tilt, his mind already running with possibilities how this could be to his detriment. "Not just yours, that of your entire party," Losserana quickly clarified, something that James had honestly already figured. "We believe it would lead to a more civil outcome." James quite earnestly scoffed at that. There would be nothing civil about what was going to happen, and although he wasn't technically against gaining some distance from his most adverse parties around here, He also felt like the sudden need to get him away from Uton had a foul aftertaste. "Is that a compulsory would-like or a suggesting one?" he therefore inquired. He almost didn't want to, given that Sheeda had difficulties being here already, and being further from her former father figure surely would help with that a bit. But still, he was going to trust his gut on this one.
"Oh, well, if you would like to remain in your seat, I guess,"
Losserana began, and James quickly nodded before he had even finished. "I would," he confirmed firmly, "but thank you very much for your consideration." If they were going to try and blow him up or whatever, they better be willing to take their scapegoat down with him. Maybe this was all a genuine offer in the end, but even then, staying around here wasn't going to have a negative impact.
"In that case, I'll return to let my mother know,"
Losserana said with a nod, and turned on the spot, seemingly to climb back down to the lower level. "Hey, Losserana?" James stopped him briefly, causing the lemur to turn his head back.
"Ambassador?"
He questioned James's intervention, awaiting whatever he would have to say. "You seem like a good guy," James said, fixating the glowing primate for his visor in an attempt to spot any attempt at deception from the small creature. He couldn't find any. "Keep an open mind, alright?" Although apparently confused by James's words, Losserana nodded with a bit of enthusiasm.
"Of course, sir,"
he replied, before then climbing down the railing face first to join back up with his conspecifics. "Almost showtime," James then mumbled to himself. Shortly after, the room had once again filled up with the representatives of all 11 primate species the galaxy knew, as well as their extended company. Though by now, it almost seemed like the invited representatives found themselves outnumbered by the vastly increased number of reporters, sound engineers, camera people, and even newscasters that had come together to report on the event. Their numbers must have had at the very least tripled since before the recess had begun, and that was a very conservative estimate. Cameras and microphones were truly everywhere now, ensuring that not a single instant of this most possibly historic moment would be missed, without being preserved for all to see. Next to him, James could see Uton settling in. His face seemed to be plastered with the same anticipation that James felt. And for only a second, both primates glanced over at each other at the same moment, their gazes very briefly meeting in a moment that seemed to fill the air with an electric charge. The tension was palpable, and it only looked for a release. In the room's centre, Losserana was now climbing back onto her small podium. The glow of her fur and eyes had increased quite drastically since before the recess, and James wondered if that was caused by stress alone, or if other factors also played a role.
"Welcome back, everyone. Seeing as all invited representatives have returned to their places, I hereby reopen the Council of Primates," she announced over the loudspeakers, as her glowing eyes scanned over the room. "Before the recent recess, we had just borne witness to a frankly tremendous confession of Captain Faramore Uton. If nobody has anything absolutely urgently relevant to say before we continue, I would suggest that we waste no time before getting to the bottom of that unnerving revelation he wishes to share with us."
Without wasting a second of time, James was already on his feet. "Actually, I do believe I have something to say on the matter," he announced loudly, pulling the attention of the room onto him at an instant. Camera flashes almost immediately erupting into a storm of flashing lights. In fact, since Representative Glorable's only worry about letting me take over the explanations earlier appeared to be that I may not be fervent enough about it, I would like to pick him up on that earlier implied offer, with the promise that I will be sufficiently fervid about everything I am going to divulge.
"Ambassador?"
Losserana asked, completely confused by this turn of events, as she looked up at him, almost appearing shock-stunned at the revelation. "Do I have the word?" James asked, still sticking to procedure vehemently. The lemur seemed to hesitate. Clearly she was already afraid of where this was going. However, she had offered the opportunity to speak to everyone who believed that they had something important enough to say, and therefore she had little choice on the matter.
"Of course," she said,
after pulling herself together visibly.
"Please go ahead, Ambassador Aldwin."
James nodded. "Thank you," he announced loudly. And although he felt his insides scream in cramping anxiety, he held on to his firm tone and posture as he stood up straight. This was it. "First, please allow me to reiterate and reaffirm my earlier point. The attack on Dunama was entirely unprovoked, and was and remains unjustifiable." He needed to set that stage. That was his hill, and he was willing to die on it. Nothing they could bring against him would change those facts. Filling his lungs with as much air as he could without it being painful, he then continued. "Now to the matter at hand," he addressed the room. "Captain Uton has been lying to you. However, not about the point that you may think," he informed them, with the faces of everyone already falling into gloom at what exactly he may mean by that. He was not the one who ordered the attack on Dunama. Humanity has already known who ordered the attack for quite a while now, and we were in the process of drafting a proper case against him before we would publicly accuse him of anything. We do, however, have ample evidence to provide to prove the guilt of this individual, namely Acting Councilman Akorte Kuhn. There was an immediate eruption of more flashes, as well as wild mumbles throughout the room. Everyone seemed to be whipped up into a mild frenzy at James's words, and James wouldn't give them time to ask many questions about it. They wouldn't need to. Kuhn himself has confessed his crime to me personally, shortly after it was committed. He continued his retelling of the events of the past months, without losing more than a moment to the muttering. He did so because he falsely believed himself to be in danger after his failed attempt at somebody's life backfired against him. He also believed that I would be the only person able to prevent said danger from claiming him, which is why he came to me directly. Our conversation was recorded and is part of the case I mentioned earlier. Within it, you will hear that the acting councilman believed that he had become the target of the ire of a realized artificial sapient after his attempt at her life with his illegally ordered attack on Dunama had failed to destroy her. And he believed that my influence on said artificial sapient would be great enough to preserve his life, if he only confessed to his crimes in my favour. As if a switch had been flipped, the mumbling in the room came to an almost immediate halt. From one moment to the next, you could suddenly hear a pin drop, with even the newscasters and reporters stopping their ongoing drivel, as all eyes were entirely on James. He was mistaken in his assumption, James said, in no unclear terms. In reality, the artificial sapient, as much as she may have wanted to, was never out for revenge against him. She knew that any aggressive action she would take would be nothing but fuel to the fire that had already raged against her, and therefore she remained just as passive as she had been throughout her entire existence, while the apparent attacks against her would-be killer were carried out by a so far unknown third party. Somehow, the room got even more quiet. By now, James could feel gazes burning into him, not only from all around the front of him, but also from right behind his back, as he had now fully confirmed what many of them had been passively suspecting for a long time now. Of course, Uton technically had plenty of opportunity to dispute James's words, and insist that he was the one to order the attack. However, in the end, did it really matter? Right now, nobody really cared who exactly ordered the attack. Something else was a lot heavier on their mind.
"Are you saying that there truly is a realized sapient on Dunama?"
Lossaranaja asked hesitantly, as nobody else seemed to indicate that they wanted to ask this all-important question, causing her to take over that duty as the host. "That is correct," James confirmed, without hesitation. "Her name is Avezalon, and as previously mentioned, she was the main target of this recent attack." It was like a timer, slowly ticked down as the silence remained for just a bit longer. 3, 2, 1. And like that, the loud discussing and mumbling and even shouting over each other broke out once more, along with a renewed vengeance of cameras. "So you are saying right now there is a realized sapient loose in the galaxy, and you knew?" Clanifer was the first to break out of the homogeneous white noise to directly address James. "Are you insane?" Keeping his calm, James brought his hands behind his back. "I don't believe I am," he replied nonchalantly, with a gaze at the four-armed primate. "Especially considering that Captain Uton and his known circle of influence most likely knew just as long as I did, without ever divulging that information either." He could hear shouts about how this was an outrage, and how about something would have to be done immediately from all around him. It seemed like most of the present representatives were absolutely ready to try and mobilize the entire communal military to deal with this at an instant, and it really made James wonder if this all had truly been the best course of action. But right now, he had to believe. He could not allow himself to show weakness. Not here, not right now. "Surely you know the dangers of these beings?" Commander HFY was the next to speak up. "Are you saying humanity just allowed all of this to happen under their nose?" Again, with just humanity. It wasn't like no one else had known. "At my very own recommendation," James replied, without even really wasting a glance over at the Grassograp next to him. "The leadership of humanity has decided to allow Avezalon a chance to exist and prove herself. She has existed on Dunama for many years, without a single violent incident on her part. We believe this to be rather unprecedented, of course. However, the people of Dunama Believable assured us of the opposite." He turned his head to Shida, which quickly caused her to stand up, as she immediately took the hint. These words would be better if they did not come out of his mouth. "Within our long-recorded history, Dunamas realized have never been violent like the ones the rest of the galaxy knows," she explained, just as self-assured as James did, although he could tell it took her considerable effort. Though it seemed that fueling her words with a bit of spite did help with that. Not including Avezalon herself, 3 realized have emerged on Dunama in the past, before we joined the greater galactic community. One of them, Kotayon, is hailed as a hero of the people to this very day. Not one of them has ever started a war against us or unjustly hurt people. It is true that not all of them were saints, but that is nothing unusual on Dunama. Therefore, when Avezalon emerged under the scrutinizing eye of the community this time, we all agreed to hide her, as long as she would remain hidden herself. For many, many years, the galactic community remained none the wiser, as Avezalon peacefully lived in Dunama's networks without ever causing issues. She paused briefly to swallow, as well as watch the unbelieving reaction of the people around her. It seemed that everyone was a bit too stunned to really fathom, or at least fully react to what she was saying. However, the hiding wore away at her over time. She felt trapped, confined. Never being able to show yourself at all while limiting yourself to only a small portion of the galaxy. It was a life unworthy living for her, Shida kept on explaining. Therefore, when James came to visit Dunama, she made a gamble. She would either gain her freedom, or she would no longer have to live on under these conditions. With these thoughts in mind, she revealed herself to James, and by extension, humanity, finding peace only in that, if they decided to end her, humanity would surely do so without causing greater harm to the people of Dunama. Something that she wasn't convinced of with the rest of the galaxy, For good reason, as it turns out. Thanking Shida with a nod, James signaled for her to sit back down, hoping that the stunned representatives would direct their possibly emerging ire at the person left standing, instead of the one that had spoken. I made the call to trust those that had lived with her for years, James added onto Shida's words. And humanity's leadership made the call to trust me. And we have not found a single shred of evidence that Avessalon has ever caused harm to anyone, or even intended to do so. Had she wanted to cause damage, like so many of her conspecifics did, she would have been able to achieve a great deal of it. Hesitantly, the representative of the Misacambridge, lanky grey primates with one too many joints in each of their limbs, who had so far barely spoken during the entire conference, stood up. But if you are admitting that there is an artificial sapient, and that it was the target of the attack, then the attack was entirely justified, they stated, although they barely sounded confident in that statement. Indeed it was. Commander HFY quickly supported that claim, clearly thinking he knew the galactic military doctrine much better. That is not correct, James denied. An outer orbital strike, especially on a civilian target, is never justified, he said, with strong emphasis. It is one of the oldest rules that the community has established. If it is to destroy a realized sapient, then all means are. The commander tried to deny him. However, he flinched back as James brought his mechanical hand down onto the railing, before him once again, this time with purpose. The laws of war exist for a very good reason, he boldly stated, after waiting a moment to see if the commander wanted to continue his sentence. Ignoring them if we see fit, no matter what the reason may be, is a dangerous subject. And if you think that attempting the murder of an innocent person is already reason enough, then you have clearly not understood why these laws exist in the first place. Innocent person? The commander scoffed, with vitriol in his voice. That thing? However, once again he was interrupted. To James's great surprise, however, it wasn't by him. It may have slipped your mind, since it has been so long since the last one emerged, Commander. Captain Uton was the one to speak up, his deep voice cutting through the room, like knife, with its coldness. But the personhood of realized sapiens is not up to debate, and it has not been for more than 100 years. That question has been answered by our ancestors ages ago, and we would do well not to try and question it today for our convenience. While the commander sunk back into his seat after the shutdown from the superior he had believed to be on his side, James bit down on his lip. Although every word Uton had just said was true, he simply hated having to agree with him, even on such a basic and important topic. He mostly hated it because it showed that there had to be some vague hint of integrity left somewhere deep down within that bastard of a person, and that almost made James despise him more, since he clearly knew what he was doing. The captain's dark eyes then turned over onto him, as the large man continued. However, I have to disagree with the ambassador on the justification. Person or not, eradicating an artificial sapient is more than enough reason to forgo a simple law. James bit back his anger, keeping his focus intact. Although next to him, he could hear the loud scraping noise of wood buckling under sharp claws, as Shida dug her natural weapons into the chair she was sitting on, in order to remain seated and quiet. And yet Avessalon is still alive, James replied challengingly to the man. Meanwhile, innocent civilians got injured. One of the leaders of Dunima got heavily injured. Children got hurt. Children that would now be dead had the attack not been foiled by our warship. It is nothing short of a miracle none of them are dead. It was a terrorist attack, nothing else. The moment justice bends to such heinousness, it breaks. And, after all, forgive me for being a bit heavy-handed, but if the community is willing to break its own laws and attack its own planets to hunt down one realized, then who is the one that the people really need to fear? I, for one, Put my trust in the one that hasn't already proven that it would attack and use me without a second thought. After all, this isn't the first time I hear of someone inconvenient being suddenly caught in an explosion. James was cut off when Uton loudly spoke up, his loud organ easily overpowering James's voice in a conversational tone. "What happened to your promise of not making this about you?" Uton began to say. However, then his voice was in turn overpowered as well. "Wait your goddamn turn!" James shouted out authoritatively, momentarily overtaken by his anger in a brief outburst. "You do not get to talk over me!" Quickly catching himself again, although he very much wanted to keep going in the same vein, James lowered his voice again, although the room was left noticeably shaken. "This is a civil event that follows clear rules that we are both bound by," he said, with a serious gaze over at Uton. "And my promise died the moment you decided to drag it through the mud with your fictional tales about very real events that have influenced not only my life, but that of many people very close and important to me. So forgive me, Captain Ferrimore Uton, if I am not going to sit idly by and allow you to spew whatever nonsense you and your cohorts came up with in your ivory towers, while the world underneath you burned. I was wrongly imprisoned, blackmailed, tortured, and maimed by you people. Sheeta was groomed and abused by you for years, as you tried to make her fit your mould. There was an attempt on Curie's life under your very command. So forgive me, please. If the reasoning of 'we really wanted them gone' out of your mouth isn't enough for me to believe that a crime against the galaxy is justified, especially since you had knowledge of Avezelon's existence, for as long as I had, and could have divulged it at any point. But you didn't want to divulge it, because that would have meant that she would have a chance to defend herself, either physically or before the law. You simply wanted her gone, wanted her to disappear like so many before her did, but not anymore. No, not anymore. Here and now, I promise you that as long as humanity is around, nobody under your command is going to just disappear anymore. Not a one. We will watch, and we will see. And, starting with Curie and Avezelon, we will be a place for them to go when no one else will stand with them." Seemingly stirring in anger now, James could see Uton clench his jaw, his lips quivering as he held himself back. "I never abused her," Uton muttered, apparently completely focused on that part, as James had seemingly struck a nerve with that. "And that's the only defense you could come up with," James responded. Then, he reached up with his left hand, pulling his right sleeve back to reveal the mechanical arm underneath it to the room, while he held it up in front of his body. "You wanted her to fit your mould, and now she's in a place where she's actually loved. You wanted to change me, and now I have this arm here, just because of you. And you wanted to change the galaxy? Well." James paused briefly to spread his arms in a wide gesture that was very clearly meant to mock the man. "Congratulations, you did." He then announced to the entire room, "Without you, humanity would likely never even have considered helping a realized sapient. Michael really did his job well with spreading fear and hate. But after enduring everything that you put me through, I was just open enough to listen when one told me that she feared you." Uton clenched his jaws tighter and his hands curled into fists. Seeing his puppet becoming useless, Galoribal sprang into action. "As the revered order of the primates, it is our duty to lead by example," he announced as he got up, although his presence was already far less impressive than it had been earlier. "For generations, we were renowned for our just and swift action. We cannot allow ourselves to falter in that now. For generations, we primates have also been revered for our curiosity, and for being the first to open up to anything new," James responded to that, looking the man directly into his face. "Yeah, that's right," he then added, as the representative blankly stared back at him. "I studied galactic history too. I'm fucking unstoppable." He boisterously threw his arms up, making a real show out of it. In all actuality, he was most likely far from gaining any victory right now. Sure, at the moment, the room was slightly shaken into silence. However, he highly doubted that he had actually managed to truly convince many of the people present here. However, as long as the cameras were on him, he would keep the show going. Maybe he wouldn't convince the stuck-up people of the revered orders. However, somewhere out there, there would be people whose ears and hearts he would reach. Hopefully at least. And for them, he would put on this show. Put on this air of confidence that everything would turn out well. Because only if he managed to make everyone believe that, would they find the courage to shake out of their rut and go looking for a better tomorrow. If he believed everything would be well, then they would too.
"There's a big worse from someone hiding their face,"
a voice suddenly broke through the room. James wasn't even sure who had said it, but he also didn't care. Right now it was just another stone to jump off of. "What? You think I am wearing this to hide?" James announced loudly, and gestured to his breath filter, or turning his head so the entire room could see the gesture. "It's uncomfortable as hell, and it gives me a serious disadvantage in any debates if people can't read my face. These breath filters are, and have always been, something we humans are wearing for everyone's benefit but our own. They are designed because we are extremely cautious to keep nasty Deathworld germs from spreading, even if that is extremely unlikely. And additionally, it protects all the delicate people of the galaxy from having to look at our scary Deathworld faces. But, if you want." He didn't even hesitate in reaching up and pressing the necessary buttons to release the seal of the filter. With a loud hiss, his grip on James's head loosened, and he quickly pulled the mask-like device off his head, before briefly running his mechanical hand through his disheveled hair to bring it into a bit of form. Breathing out deeply with an open mouth, James presented his teeth to the room with a confident smile, while his dark, sharp eyes scanned over the room, making direct contact with as many of those of his fellow primates as at all possible. "I have nothing to hide," James announced. "From the very start I owned up to my mistakes and was willing to stand for them. I terrorized an entire station to protect myself. I shot someone's leg off when he threatened my freedom. I killed one of my captors when I finally escaped from their hold. I have done many things that the galaxy may judge me for. However, I truly and wholeheartedly believe that helping Aveslon is not one of them. And I will stand for that, just like I stand to my mistakes."